The student will be able to multiply and divide integers using models. Okay, so before you begin this video, you're going to need your notes. And so today we're going to look at the patterns for multiplying and dividing integers. So what is the value of the expression? So let's first think about how we read this. Just a reminder, multiplication represents repeated groups of. So multiplication is groups of. And in this expression, it's 4 groups of -2. So the first model we're going to use is integer chips. And since the expression says 4 groups of -2, you can see that we have 4 groups, and -2 will be represented by red and yellow counters. In this case, the red counters represent the negatives. So here's 2, here's another group, here's 3 groups of -2, 4 groups of -2, and total you should have -8. Here's our second strategy. The second strategy is with the number line. And you'll have to know and recognize both these models. So number line strategy starts with, we have 4 groups. So starting at 0, we're going to go to the negative direction because it's -2. So here's 1 group of -2, 2 groups of -2, 3 groups of -2, and 4 groups of -2, which leaves you at -8. And if you check the number line with the product, you should see that they're the same. So 4 groups of -2 on the number line equals -8. So please take a moment. Let me go back. Take a moment and copy this down the slide. Example 2. What is the value of the expression -4 times -2? Or -4 groups of -2. That's a little awkward to think about. So think about this first negative sign as the opposite. Remember that the negative sign represents the opposite. So this expression actually says, what's the opposite of 4 groups of -2? So let's use our integer chip strategy first. And so this looks familiar. This is the same example as example 1. We have 4 groups of -2. But remember, in this expression, it says the opposite of that. So we would, if it was just 4 groups of -2, the answer would be -8. But it's the opposite of that, so your answer should be +8. So take a moment and think about that. So the strategy, the next one is the number line. And so again, we would start at 0. And we would say, oh, this is 4 groups of -2. This looks just like example 1, 4 groups of -2. 2 groups of -2, 3 groups of -2, and 4 groups of -2. And the end point would be -8. But it's the opposite of that, so our answer should be +8. And you can see that the number line answer product should also equal what it looks like with the integer chips. And take a moment and copy this slide. What is the value of the expression of -10 divided by 2? So just a reminder, division represents splitting into groups or sharing. -10 split into 2 groups. So we have strategy 1 with the integer chips, which is we have 10 and we split them into 2 groups. So each one has -5 in each group. So here's what it looks like with the number line. -10 divided into 2 groups. So we'd have to think about it. We have to divide and share that -10 with 2 groups. So here's the first group, and then here's the second group. And so how many negative integers are in each group? -10 divided by 2 is -5. So let's make sure that you've recorded that. Now that we've done the examples, what's the rule that we could write for when we are multiplying and dividing integers? How do we know what the sign of the product or the quotient is going to be? Because the rules are the same. So a positive 5 times 3 is going to be positive. You should know that because that's just what you learned in elementary school. But then if I have the opposite of 5 times negative 3 is equal to 15. This is the opposite of 21 divided by negative 3 equals 7. And those are positive. Here it's 5 times negative 3 equals negative 15 because 5 groups of negatives would give you negative. And 21 groups of shared by the opposite of 3 equals negative 7. And here's the same thing. Think of it as fact family. We're just reversing the order. Negative 5 times 3 could still be thought of as 3 groups of negative 5. So 3 groups of negatives would be more negatives. And negative 21 divided into 3 groups would also be negative. So if I multiply and divide by one negative, my quotient or my product is going to be negative. So let's go back to this example. Well, what happens if it's the opposite of what we just looked at over here? So if I have 3 groups of negatives that give me a product of a negative, then the opposite of 5 groups of negative 3 should be positive. So let's actually write these rules down. When multiplying and dividing integers, if your integers have the same sign, your product or your quotient will be positive. If your integers have different signs, your product or your quotient will be negative. So now let's do a little fluency check. You don't have to write this down. Let's see if you can figure out whether the result should be positive or negative. So positive 3 times positive 5 is positive. What about negative 14 divided by 2? So this is negative 14 divided by 2. Your quotient should be negative. And last but not least, what's the opposite of 7 groups of negative 2? Your product should be positive. Okay, so I hope that you can explain in your own words how to find the sign of your product or quotient, and take a minute and write it down in a few sentences in your own words.